This is Jason DeBoard with the Original Prop blog. This is part 4 of the series looking at the lightsaber up for auction by Profiles in History that is attributed to use by Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope that's going up for auction this week. So I put up a video earlier today, so you're probably wondering why a second video. The reason is I received a reader comment on the Original Prop blog in response to one of these articles that came from Roger Christian himself, who is the consigner of the piece, and obviously he was the Academy Award winning set director on the film. So just to be fair, I wanted to try to get this up as quickly as possible. I haven't really prepared anything to say, but I wanted to read his message just because it's not really obvious when people post reader comments unless you scroll to the bottom of the article. So not a lot of people would see this otherwise, so I wanted to put this in its own dedicated video. So Mr. Christian reached out to me via reader comment at the bottom of this article on the Original Prop blog, and this is what he had to say. So he says, "Dear Jason, the two photos immediately below my signature in my COA depict the exact same lightsaber that is being sold by Profiles in History. In your comparison photos, there's a scratch on the lever of the clasp holding the bubble strip that matches exactly in all three shots. The image you took at Comic-Con, the image I shot for authentication, and the image from Profile in History's catalog. My authentication images were taken in darker lighting conditions, which explains the darker impression of that rivet head on the lever. Lighting changes everything, especially chrome objects. You state the ringed bracket holding the bubble strip is made in a fixed position. This is simply not accurate. When the lever is loosened, the ring assembly can be moved. This explains the different position of the bubble strip you noted in your comparison and also explains the variation you saw on the corners of the T-strip because you are comparing two different T-strips since they're located at different sides of the hilt. The variable positioning of the bubble strip is seen by looking at the original set of photos from the film. The reference photo with the red rectangles I took from an online publication, which must have been your blog. It neatly illustrated what modifications I stuck onto the Graflex handle to make the lightsaber. Best regards, Roger Christian." So first of all, I would like to thank Roger Christian for taking the time to watch one or more of my videos and address some of my questions. And I just wanted to respond to these point by point. He says he's basically saying that the lightsaber that's depicted in his letter of authenticity is the same that's being sold by Profiles in History. So I'm going to pull up that image. Okay, so this is page 3 of his letter of authenticity. I'll just quickly scroll through these. So letter of authenticity, this is the language that is part of the letter of authenticity and that's part of the auction description. This is obviously a publicity photo. He's talking about his book that he includes with the LOA. This is where he says, "This lightsaber below is one of the originals and it is authenticated as made by me, the maker of Luke's lightsaber, for which I won the Academy Award, signed Roger Christian, October 2017. And then there's these two photos, which were the ones that I included in an analysis where I was looking at these photos and I was comparing them to the official Profiles in History auction catalog photos. And this is the photo he mentioned that is a publicity photo, and I added these descriptors to it, and he found it on my website and actually used it in the LOA, which is no big deal. Like that's fine. I just thought it was a weird coincidence. And then the last page of the LOA has two more of these photos that he took that were part of my analysis, and a photo of himself holding the lightsaber, and then another publicity photo. So in his reader comment, he's basically saying, yes, this is the lightsaber that's up for auction, and it's the same lightsaber that is depicted in the profiles and history photos, as well as some photos I personally took at San Diego Comic-Con back in July. Okay, and here he's saying, in my comparison photos, there's a scratch on the lever of the clasp holding the bubble strip that matches in all 3 shots. Now, in my prior videos, I looked at that and I thought it only appeared in his photos that appear on his LOA, and it did not appear in the catalog photos. I revisited those photos, actually looked at them for like an hour. I also looked at photos that I took as screen captures from that BBC documentary, because that seemed to really match up with the photos in the LOA. So I kind of looked at all those again, and I tend to agree with him. I think that scratch he's referencing may actually appear in all the photos. So I'm going to pull up a new analysis with some additional photos. So this is the photo analysis I put up in one of the prior videos, and it might be what Mr. Christian was looking at when he wrote that reader comment. So in this upper left-hand corner, this is a crop of one of the catalog photos made by Profiles in History. Bottom left corner, this is a crop of one of the photos that appears on the letter of authenticity prepared by Mr. Christian. To the right, the bottom right, this is a screen capture of part of that documentary in one of the prior videos, The Galaxy Britain Built by the BBC. So previously, I looked at the 3 of these. In the bottom 2, this rivet looks the same. And then you see this scratch here. It's kind of a V shape. Also appears here. So I thought, okay, these 2 are the same lightsaber. Now, when I looked at this one, the rivet looked very different to me. This looked more machined in silver, whereas these look kind of more copper looking and kind of hammered. Like here you can kind of see a reflection where it looks machined, and this looks more hammered. This looks more hammered. And I saw a scratch here, but it looked different. But, I looked at it. I went back and reviewed the Profiles in History catalog photos. And, like he says, lighting does really change everything. But I do believe that this might be a match across all the images that I'm looking at, this V-shaped scratch. It appears a little bit differently in the different shooting conditions. But I can see, though it looks a little different, I think it might just be, like he's saying, it might just be lighting. So I tend to agree with his correction of my initial assessment in reviewing these. I think all 3 of these, really all examples of this lightsaber that appears from these 3 different sources, this documentary, the letter of authenticity, and the catalog, I believe that scratch is the same. Now, I prepared a new analysis with some additional photos. I'm going to pull that up now. This full top row here, all 3 of these images with the yellow background, these are all from the Profiles in History catalog photos. They're all cropped and kind of reoriented in different ways, so they're kind of pointing the same direction. So sometimes I had to flip it around or tilt it a little bit. That's true of all of these images. The middle 2 with the orange background, these are the letter of authenticity photos. Right below that, with the kind of fuchsia background, these are screen captures from the BBC documentary, again, kind of cropped in and rotated. Now, like I mentioned, in further review, I tend to agree with Mr. Christian. I believe that there is a consistent scratch, kind of V-shaped scratch on this lever. It looks more pronounced, especially in this BBC one. Like it looks like really a cut into the metal. Like it looks like a carved sort of odd shaped V. But I do think that is consistent. Now, it is difficult to do an analysis of these different pictures because they're all at different angles and they tend to kind of favor one side versus the other because of the orientation of the bubble strip. So I did a quick kind of look. The one thing that I did notice was the grips were a little bit different. So, and I'm not going to go into in depth on this, but if you look at these are kind of squared off, and there's sort of this scoring. It looks like kind of a razor cut that's a little bit consistent with these that I'm not seeing here. But like he said, the bubble strip is oriented in a different direction, so it's not an apples to apples comparison. I did feel like the strips looked a little bit different, how they were sort of cut or not cut on the ends. But I'm not going to go into that right now. The one thing I'm having difficulty with is this rivet. In these 3 profiles examples, to my eyes, it looks silver, it looks machined. And like I said before, in these examples, on the letter of authenticity and the BBC program, it looks more rusted colored, and it doesn't look machined. It looks kind of like it's hammered, like it has had some. It just doesn't look machined to me. It looks like something that's kind of had some pounding on it or something. One new thing that I noticed, and again, it's difficult to compare images of things taken under very different photograph lighting conditions. In the letter of authenticity examples and the BBC documentary examples, right above that rivet, it looks like there's a machined divot. It's most easily seen here. And actually, let me pull up that specific image. With this blown up, you can see what I'm talking about here. There's this, it looks like a machined divot right here. And again, with this close up, this doesn't look machined to me. It looks like a different kind of material that's darker in nature. It doesn't look darker photographically. And then here you can see that cut V. But this little, it looks like a machined divot. And again, it could be a trick of the light or something, but I kind of noticed it across these images from the BBC and from the LOA photos. It looks like there's a machined divot there. So when we go to the profiles and history example, I'm going to zoom in and lose some quality here, but I don't see that machined divot. And again, the resolution isn't that great in this image, but that's just one thing I noticed. It doesn't really make sense because this does kind of look like that V scratch. I don't know. It's really hard to say. So going back to Mr. Christian's reader comment, as I had mentioned, and we just went through, his position is that there's a scratch on the lever in all of the images, and I don't really dispute that. I can see that. It's not really as clear on the profiles and history images, but I think it might be a lighting thing. There's definitely something there, and it looks like it very much could be the very same scratch. So, I tend to agree with him on all these points, except for that rivet. The rivet still looks different to me. So the other point that Mr. Christian made is he said, you state the ringed bracket holding the bubble strip is made in a fixed position. This is simply not accurate. And I agree with him. That was actually a mistake on my part, and I apologize for that. Someone actually reached out to me as well on that point, and I just haven't held a Graflex in a very long time. I think it's probably been 14 years or something. And I just misremembered how those worked. So basically, if you flip that lever up, the lever that we've just been talking about, that loosens it and you can flip it around. Whereas I was thinking when you put it together, I was thinking it was fixed in place. So that was totally a misstatement on my part. So I completely agree with his correction here, and I apologize for that. That's my mistake. And I think I covered this a little bit already. He was talking about the T-strip, and they don't match up because they're oriented different in relation to the bubble strip, and I agree with that as well. So my only other thought on the T-strip comment is that when I did do a quick review and revisited those images right before I started recording this, it did seem like the profile and history photos depicted kind of more wear and tear on the top edges of those T-strips than what I'm seeing in the other images from the LOA and from that BBC documentary. But, a lot of it's photography, so I didn't really dig into that. So I'm just going to leave his statement as it stands there. So the last point, we already kind of went over that. Just that didn't mean anything to me. I just thought it was a really weird coincidence that that image that I had kind of mocked up with the diagram about the different parts ended up on his LOA that he borrowed. I have no problem with that. I just thought it was really surreal that I was looking into this, and then I was like, oh, so that does not mean anything to me at all. That's no big deal. So basically, my takeaway from this is that Mr. Christian's saying that there aren't two sabers based on the images that I'm looking at from the BBC documentary and the LOA, and then the profiles and history, what they've had on display and what they've photographed and what they're saying is in the auction. He's saying it's the exact same lightsaber. So I just wanted to revisit two other things in light of the fact that he's saying there's just the one lightsaber. That's it. There's no two lightsabers. Like, I'm misreading that. I'm misinterpreting the photos. So I'm going to take that at face value at this time. And I just wanted to revisit two other things that we looked at in prior videos. So one of those things I wanted to revisit really quickly is part of this AMA on Reddit. AMA stands for Ask Me Anything. So it's a scheduled event where public figures put themselves out there to answer questions in real time. And it's great that Roger Christian does these because he's had a really interesting career and he took a lot of time answering a lot of questions. This is one that stood out for me as it pertains to this question about lightsabers. So I'm going to read a little bit of this. This was from June of 2015. So someone asked, how does it feel to be responsible for the creation of arguably the most iconic weapon in film history? And Roger Christian starts his answer by saying, I feel really honored and proud and kind of relieved that it worked, and it still works. So he goes on a little bit about his influences with King Arthur. So then he goes into a story about finding the Graflex, which became the basis for the Luke Skywalker lightsaber. So I'm going to continue reading here. And it was fairly late in the day. I'd made all the weapons. I'd made Luke's binoculars. I'd made the rest of the things I'd needed. It was the laser sword that I needed. And it was late in the day that I found it. And I love this object. I've got one in my hand now. I'm making some exactly as I made my originals. I've had the T-strip made exactly as I put on the first one. I've had bubble strips made identically to the ones that I used. I'm making a few of those. I don't know what I will do with them. Maybe I'll auction them off. I know people would love them. And they're not saying they're used in Star Wars, but they are prototypes of what I'd made. So I think, why not? So this kind of takes me back to the word prototypes. And that's what I brought up in the last video. I'm not really sure what that word means to Roger Christian. In the context of this one statement, just here on this one AMA Reddit, he's describing something he has not yet done. I'm making some exactly as I made my originals. So he's talking about making them like contemporary, like now. I mean, not literally now, but, he's talking about it like in current day. He's making some. And then he talks about getting these replica parts that are exactly, and identical to what he used. Exactly identical. And he says, again, I'm making a few of those. Here he says, I'm making some. Here he says, I'm making a few of those. I don't know what I will do with them. And then he says, maybe I'll auction them off. I know people would love them. And they're not saying they're used in Star Wars, but are prototypes of what I'd made. So I think, why not? So again, that word prototype, that's kind of the sticking point with me. I'm not sure what he's talking about. What he's describing here in this passage is making modern day replicas of the originals. These are not things that were used in the film. He's talking about making them now. And he's calling these prototypes. So in January of 2016, 6 months later, on his Cinema Alchemist Facebook page, Roger Christian says, "This is an exact prototype of Luke's lightsaber I made with an old Graflex, some T-strip, a bubble strip from a calculator, and a D-ring held together with a lot of super glue. And these are the same images that appear in the letter of authenticity." So that was, one of my outstanding questions, and why I was wondering if there were two lightsabers, if there was one here that he's talking about as a quote prototype, and then there's the one in the Profiles in History auction, and the photos look different. So I speculated, okay, well, maybe this is a replica, and then the one in Profiles is a totally different lightsaber. I looked at the images. I noticed some differences, namely that rivet. So as noted in the last video, we have the letter of authenticity, October 2017. Roger Christian saying today, yes, this lightsaber that's depicted in this LOA, that's the same one in the Profiles in History auction. And on the LOA, he says, "This lightsaber below is one of the originals, and it is authenticated as made by me, the maker of Luke's lightsaber, for which I won the Academy Award. Signed, Roger Christian, October 2017. Then we go over to his Facebook post in January of 2016, and he says, "This is an exact prototype of Luke's lightsaber I made with an old Graflex, some T-strip, a bubble strip from a calculator, and a D-ring held together with a lot of super glue. These are the same images. These two images down here are the same as these two images here." And if we go back to his reader comment posted 3 hours ago today, Mr. Christian says, "The two photos immediately below my signature and my COA depict the exact same lightsaber that is being sold by Profiles in History." So he's saying that's the same lightsaber. And, here on his Facebook page, he's saying it's a prototype. And then here on this AMA, he's saying, "I've got one in my hand now. I'm making some exactly as I made my originals. I've had the T-strip made exactly as I put on the first one. And I've had bubble strips made identically to the ones that I used. I'm making a few of those. I don't know what I will do with them. Maybe I'll auction them off. I know people would love them, and they're not saying they're used in Star Wars, but they are prototypes of what I made. So I think, why not?" And then we go back to the auction description, and it says, "Original production used Luke Skywalker lightsaber from Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, from the collection of Oscar-winning set director Roger Christian, who built all the lightsabers for the first Star Wars film." And then further, it says, "I handmade about 5 to use during filming, and the one you are buying is one of those used throughout the filming in London." So I would still love some clarification on this point. I think we're getting closer. It's just, there's a lot of information out there on the internet. I'm just trying to make sense of it. I really appreciate Mr. Christian taking the time to look at my questions, in these videos. I know it's probably a big waste of time because the videos are long. And, like I said, this is nothing personal against anyone. I've got no stake in anything. I just care about this hobby. I love Star Wars. I like to see original props found and taken care of. And, I'm a big proponent of auction houses. I think it's great because if something sells for a lot of money, it's going to be taken care of, or it's going to end up in a museum, or it's going to end up with someone that's going to take it out on exhibit. So it's all a good thing. There were just some things about this auction that I found puzzling, and I'm still unclear on this question about this being characterized as a prototype on his Mr. Christian's Facebook page, and then this AMA 6 months prior to that, he was talking about making basically replicas exactly as he made the first one, and he's calling them prototypes. And in this Facebook post, he's saying this is an exact prototype, and I remain confused. So, I'm just trying to reconcile these questions, and hopefully Mr. Christian will see this. He'll have a great answer, and I'll stop making videos about Luke's lightsaber. But that's kind of my outstanding general question about this piece coming up for auction. So I really appreciate the way that this has been received by Mr. Christian, and he corrected me on a few things that I actually was incorrect about. So I'm the first to say, like, I'm never right about everything, and if I make a mistake, please point it out, and I'll own up to it. So thanks again for checking out this video. I apologize again if it's too long, but I wanted to for sure give Mr. Christian, equal play, equal airtime, and bring attention to his perspective, his comment, his answers to some of the questions that I had. So thanks for watching.